A warning from Joker. Who? You thought God wasn't watching? Ah, how adorable. Look, there are people in this world who have mastered the art of looking spotless while leaving destruction behind them. They smile after breaking someone. They speak gently after lying. They perform innocence after deliberately planting wounds inside someone's chest. And the crowd believes them because people judge by what they see. Faces, tears, stories. They cheer for whoever cries loudest first. But God requires no presentation. He already observed when they twisted the truth. He saw the messages they erased. He heard the promises they made while simultaneously planning their betrayal. He was present in every moment no human witnessed. So do not spiral when they fool the room. Do not exhaust yourself trying to prove what God already confirmed. Let them enjoy the applause. Let them keep the mask on. Let them collect the sympathy of people who only heard a fragment of the story. Because life has its own quiet accounting system, not always immediate, not always the way you pictured it. But every seed finds its season. Every concealed action has a witness. What was done to you does not vanish, simply because the person who did it slept soundly afterward. A person can outrun your words. They can outrun your evidence. They can outrun your tears. But they cannot outrun the one who watched every moment unfold. So stay calm, not passive. Calm, not blind. Calm, not broken. Calm. Because sometimes the most powerful response is not pursuing them. It is remaining standing while truth makes its unhurried journey, stopping at every address it needs to visit. And when it arrives with exact weight. Slowly. Precisely. And you know what causes the deepest wound? It is not the betrayal itself. It is watching the person who hurt you fall asleep peacefully, completely unbothered, as if nothing occurred. That specific image rewires something inside a person, because the mind begins asking questions it cannot easily silence. Did they ever genuinely care? Was I deceived the entire time? Was any of it real? And sometimes the answer is more painful than the original hurt. Because some people never loved your soul. They loved your patience. They loved your willingness to forgive. They loved that you remained soft while they remained entirely selfish. You were not a human being to them. You were convenience, a source of comfort, access, attention, a space they could pour their darkness into while performing concern for yours. And when you finally reach your limit, they suddenly act bewildered. Now they cannot understand why you became withdrawn, why your eyes carry a different expression, why your voice sounds drained, as though pain materializes randomly, as though hearts shatter for entertainment. No. People become emotionally distant after surviving experiences they should never have been forced to endure. That is why silence becomes weighted after betrayal. Because the soul is trying to comprehend how someone looked directly into your heart and still decided to wound it. But hear this carefully. Do not allow injustice to turn you into someone who worships revenge. Do not become consumed with destroying people who are already quietly destroying themselves from the inside. Because God sees beyond surface behavior. He sees intention. And intention is the most terrifying thing in existence. A person can manufacture kindness, manufacture grief, manufacture innocence, manufacture loyalty. But intention always leaves its mark on the soul. And eventually, life begins exposing those people without requiring any effort from you. People start noticing patterns. Masks begin slipping. The same manipulation loses its effect because deception requires constant maintenance. Truth does not. Stop draining yourself, trying to open the eyes of everyone around you. Some people will defend wrongdoing simply because wrongdoing treated them kindly. Let God address what human perception missed, because no tear disappears, no silent suffering disappears, no hidden cruelty disappears. Everything waits, and one day, everything responds. And when that response finally comes, it rarely arrives with noise, no thunder, no dramatic scene, no cinematic punishment people picture in their minds. Sometimes it arrives quietly. A loss they cannot find a logical explanation for, a persistent heaviness in their chest during the night. People abandoning them for the exact same reasons they once laughed at you for grieving over. Interesting, isn't it? The same disrespect they normalized suddenly becomes intolerable when it enters their own experience. The same isolation they handed someone else suddenly feels like suffocation when they taste it themselves. That is why those who have grown wise stop bargaining for revenge. Life already has everyone's address memorized, and God never misplaces a single detail. Not the voice that trembled while trying to hold itself together, not the humiliation swallowed in silence, not the nights spent blaming yourself because someone else's cruelty left your heart confused. He witnessed all of it, including the things you never voiced, especially those things. Some people believe they escaped because nothing happened right away. That is the most dangerous illusion of all. Delay makes arrogant souls feel untouchable. They begin believing their fabrications are reality. Their manipulation hardens into habit. Their cruelty solidifies into personality, and gradually, their inner world begins rotting while their outward face continues smiling. Because every action leaves a residue, either peace or poison, and no human being can poison others indefinitely without eventually drinking from the same cup. So if you are in pain right now, if you are sitting somewhere alone, questioning your value because someone violated your trust, listen carefully. Do not measure justice by how quickly it appears. Some lessons arrive late because they arrive whole. The person who treated loyalty as a joke may spend years surrounded entirely by dishonest people. The person who played carelessly with hearts may one day desperately crave real love and never find solid ground. The person who found satisfaction in humiliating others may one day feel completely invisible in a crowded room. And the terrifying part? They will remember. Somewhere beneath everything, they will remember precisely what they once did to someone else. Because the soul maintains its own records even when the mouth refuses to acknowledge them. So heal. Do not chase every explanation you feel owed. Do not sacrifice your peace, trying to force unwilling people to acknowledge what they refuse to see. God witnessed it. God knows. And what belongs to every soul will arrive with precise accuracy. Sometimes the consequence is not what happens around a person. It is what begins happening inside them. Because not every shattered soul appears shattered from the outside. Some people continue smiling while gradually losing the capacity to experience peace. And that is genuinely terrifying. To eat without tasting satisfaction. To laugh without feeling joy. To sit surrounded by people while feeling entirely hollow. To compulsively chase noise because stillness forces a confrontation with what you have become. Many people assume consequences only mean losing possessions, social standing, or relationships. But sometimes the real consequence is becoming someone who can no longer rest. A mind burdened with buried guilt eventually transforms into its own prison, even when no one else can see the bars. That is why certain people require constant distraction, always scrolling, always talking, always reaching for attention, always needing background noise. Because silence begins speaking when the weight of lies becomes unbearable. And in their most honest moments, they know. They remember who they hurt to preserve their ego. They remember who wept because of choices they made. They remember the messages they ignored while later performing innocence. People can bury memories, but souls do not let go of truth. And God does not forget the version of you that appeared when no audience was present. Not the curated version, the real one, the hidden one, the one that emerged when consequences felt impossible. That is why you should never look at people who cause harm and seem comfortable afterward with envy. You are observing the costume, not the battle occurring inside their chest. Because genuine peace is not a well-practiced smile. Genuine peace is falling asleep without mentally replaying your own cruelty. It is not needing to distort reality just to survive your own conscience. Some people forfeit that capacity permanently. So guard your heart carefully. Do not develop pride in causing pain. Do not become addicted to making others suffer. Do not celebrate another person's collapse. The soul learns through repetition, and people gradually become the very darkness they once despised. That is the deep irony of this world. The wounded sometimes transform into sources of harm, not because pain demanded it, but because the ego discovered a certain intoxication in striking back. Stay human even after betrayal. Stay truthful even after being deceived. Stay uncorrupted even when surrounded by corruption. Because when everything ultimately concludes, reputation means nothing before God. Masks mean nothing. Justifications mean nothing. Only truth survives. Only truth. Do you know what unsettles dishonest people most deeply? Not being exposed, not confrontations, not even retaliation. It is encountering someone they failed to destroy because they expected pain to finish you permanently. They expected betrayal to leave you permanently bitter, permanently fragile, permanently lost. And when they witness you still breathing, still present, still composed, something inside them becomes unstable, because your continued existence becomes proof. Proof that their lies lacked the power they believed they had. Proof that something inside you was protected beyond their reach. That is why certain people become quietly fixated on watching the person they harmed, checking discreetly, listening for information, waiting silently to hear that you finally fell apart. Not out of genuine concern, because guilt and pride, fused together, produce a particular kind of paranoia. They need to believe you deserved what happened. They require the belief that you were the source of the problem, because accepting the truth would force them to sit with themselves honestly. And many people would rather damage 10 innocent hearts than spend a single night alone with their own conscience. That is how catastrophically dangerous ego becomes when moral awareness dissolves completely. So a person begins rewriting their own history internally. Your patience gets reframed as weakness. Your kindness gets reframed as foolishness. Your silence gets reframed as admission of guilt and their betrayal. Somehow that becomes something earned. But God sees past the edited versions of events. He perceives the envy that wore a friendly face, the rivalry that disguised itself as companionship, the cruelty that hid behind casual humor. And some of the most harmful people are not obvious enemies. They are composed pretenders, people who embrace you while privately enjoying your pain. People who offer advice while internally hoping you stumble. People who perform worry while studying your suffering like observers at a scene. Be discerning around souls whose smile appears too perfectly calibrated during your most difficult moments. Those people are not misunderstood. They are visible. Still, do not surrender your life to obsessing over who wronged you. Darkness has a way of becoming something you crave. Initially, you only want fairness. Then you want understanding. Then you want them to experience precisely what they caused you to experience. And imperceptibly, your inner peace begins, depending on another person's downfall. That is poison. Do not consume poison while waiting for someone else to be harmed by it. Some people are already experiencing their consequence through becoming who they have become. Consider what it means to wake up every single day requiring deception to preserve your image. Consider needing manipulation simply to feel significant. Consider never being certain whether anyone genuinely loves you because your entire existence was constructed on performance. That is not freedom. That is profound spiritual exhaustion dressed in impressive clothing. And eventually, the mask becomes too heavy. Everyone reaches their limit, even those who manipulate, even those who feel untouchable, even those who convince themselves consequences would never find them. Because truth is patient in a way that is almost frightening. It will wait years if that is what is required. And when it finally moves, it asks nothing for permission. So if your heart is worn out tonight, if betrayal altered the lens through which you see other people, if pain left you colder than you used to be, hear this. Do not abandon your belief in goodness simply because someone abused yours. Not everyone is performing. Not everyone takes pleasure in causing harm. Not everyone conceals poison behind warmth. And most importantly, God did not overlook your pain. Silence does not equal absence. Delay does not equal neglect. And the fact that people celebrated the wrong person does not mean that the same mistake was made in heaven. One day, everything concealed will exist in full light. Everything. And perhaps that is precisely why betrayal fundamentally reshapes how a person perceives the world. Not because the pain was brief, but because something sacred was handled carelessly. Trust. People do not fully grasp what trust actually represents. It is not simply accepting someone's words. It is handing your interior world to another person and hoping they choose not to crush it for their own benefit. And when they do, when they smile while betraying you, when they appear undisturbed while you are quietly collapsing internally, something foundational within the human soul begins withdrawing. That is why some people who carry wounds stop laughing in the same way, stop speaking in the same way, stop allowing access to their heart in the same way, not because something cruel entered them, but because they finally understood how dangerous people become when their desire erases their conscience. Some human beings will demolish someone's peace simply to protect their pride. Some will choose deception simply because honesty would embarrass them. Some will observe you drowning emotionally and still express confusion about why you are no longer the same person, as though pain should leave no trace, as though betrayal should somehow illuminate you. No, pain leaves its impressions on the spirit. But hear this, do not permit pain to persuade you that God walked away from justice. Human timing is impatient. Divine timing is precise. You want immediate clarity, immediate accountability, immediate consequences. But sometimes God allows things to continue because what is hidden must first completely reveal itself. A soul built on dishonesty eventually exposes itself without any outside assistance. Arrogance becomes visible in time. Patterns repeat themselves. Masks develop cracks. The same methods of manipulation encounter new people, and gradually those watching begin recognizing the darkness they once defended. Because deception can impress observers temporarily, but it cannot sustain itself indefinitely. Truth exists differently. Truth maintains itself without requiring a performance. Truth does not grow anxious when scrutinized. Deception does. That is precisely why manipulative people become agitated when composed truth enters their presence. Because composed truth dismantles illusion without raising its voice. And illusion is the only thing some people possess. Without their manipulation, they feel powerless. Without attention, they feel they do not exist. Without the ability to control outcomes, they feel terror. So they generate chaos around others as a way of avoiding the chaos inside themselves. And many sincere hearts suffer as a result of egos that refuse to be held accountable. Still, do not carry hatred indefinitely. Hatred is a burden. It binds the soul to the people who caused it damage. Forgiveness is not always reconciliation. It does not require trusting again without reason. It does not demand pretending nothing occurred. Sometimes forgiveness is simply the decision to stop poisoning your own heart. You release the obsession. You stop replaying the betrayal through the night. You stop attempting to understand why people capable of cruelty chose cruelty. Because darkness reveals itself in time. And perhaps the most difficult truth to fully absorb is discovering that some people were entirely aware of how deeply they were hurting you and continued without changing course. That awareness can fracture a person temporarily, but it can also awaken something essential. It awakens the understanding of where boundaries are needed. It awakens self-respect. It awakens emotional discernment. Sometimes pain removes illusions that comfort would have shielded indefinitely, and that is painful. But it is also protective. Imagine spending your entire life devoted to people who privately celebrate your setbacks. Imagine never discovering the jealousy hiding behind their smiles. Imagine never seeing the truth at all. Painful revelation is still preferable to comfortable blindness. So find gratitude for the uncomfortable exposures. Find gratitude for the distance that developed. Find gratitude for the silence that revealed who was never truly loyal. Because not every loss is destruction. Sometimes separation is protection wearing dark clothing. And one day you will stop grieving certain people. Not because what they did became acceptable, but because your soul finally understood that their absence contributes more to your well-being than their presence ever did. And when that recognition arrives, peace returns, softly. Not with announcement, softly. The way early light enters a room that endured a long and difficult night. After everything. After the lies, after the confusion, after the nights when your chest carried more weight than seemed survivable. You begin arriving at an understanding that most people never reach. Not everyone loses you when you walk away. Some people lost you the moment they stopped treating your heart with care. That is the real beginning of an ending, not the distance, not the silence, the disrespect. Because a soul can endure conflict. A soul can endure mistakes. A soul can endure difficult periods, but repeated disrespect slowly destroys emotional safety. And once emotional safety is gone, love begins suffocating without making a sound. It is remarkable how some people dismantle something genuinely precious while believing they are emerging victorious. They deceive and feel sharp. They manipulate and feel significant. They dismiss your pain and mistake that for resilience. But emotional destruction always leaves wreckage somewhere, even within the person causing it. especially within them. Because every act of cruelty conditions the soul toward something harmful. It teaches numbness. It teaches selfishness. It teaches the ability to sever from guilt. And human beings were not designed to carry darkness without consequence. Eventually, it seeps outward. Into relationships, into the quality of sleep, into anxiety, into a pervasive emptiness they cannot adequately describe to anyone. That is why some people possess everything visible: financial security, admiration, attractiveness, status, and still cannot find rest at night. Because inner peace cannot be acquired from the outside. It is constructed through honesty, through clean motivation, through the choice not to harm innocent people for momentary ego satisfaction. And many souls exchange their peace for pride without grasping the true cost until years have passed. Ego delivers its invoice very late, painfully late. And here is something else people get wrong about healing. They assume it means forgetting. Real healing means being able to remember without opening the same wound again. The memory remains but no longer governs your breath, no longer fractures your sleep, no longer makes you question your worth through every night. That is when God begins restoring what pain nearly erased: confidence, clarity, discernment, emotional strength. And strangely, certain betrayals reveal themselves later as things that contributed to your growth. Not because betrayal itself was beneficial, but because it forced development that comfort would have postponed forever. Some people only discovered their genuine worth after being treated as though they had none. Some only learned the necessity of limits after extending themselves beyond sustainability. Some only found a genuine relationship with God after human beings failed them thoroughly. Pain has a terrible method of stripping away false comforts. But perhaps those false comforts were obstructing your vision entirely. And perhaps the reason specific people exited your life was because God listened to conversations you were never present for. He observed motivations you had no way of seeing. He protected you from futures your emotions would have walked toward without hesitation. Consider that carefully. Sometimes what feels like rejection is actually mercy taking the shape of loss. Sometimes what feels like abandonment rescues your soul before your feelings can comprehend the reason. But we are emotional beings. We plead for things that work quietly against us. We grieve over doors that heaven closed for our own benefit. We pursue people who would have dismantled our peace entirely had they been allowed to remain. And later, much later, understanding arrives gently. You finally perceive the manipulation that was always present, the buried jealousy, the emotional maneuvering, the imbalance you normalized, the exhaustion you accepted as ordinary, and you sit quietly wondering why you fought so hard to preserve something that was steadily diminishing your spirit. That is why patience matters during heartbreak, because emotions are deafening in the beginning. But truth speaks in measured, quiet tones. And once truth has fully arrived, you stop romanticizing what was harming you. You stop reaching for fragments of care from people who viewed your wholeness as a convenience. You stop directing blame at yourself for someone else's absence of conscience. And the most beautiful development? You begin reclaiming emotional freedom. Not coldness. Freedom. Freedom from needing their acknowledgement. Freedom from needing their approval. Freedom from needing the world to finally validate your version of events. Because God understood your version from the beginning. And that in its simplicity, is sufficient. Once that becomes truly understood, something inside you begins settling. Not because life transforms into something simple, not because people suddenly choose honesty, but because you stop expecting human beings to bear a weight that only God can carry with perfection. People misread, people make assumptions, people evaluate based on appearance, emotion, timing, and performance. That is partly why dishonest people endure as long as they sometimes do. They study responses more attentively than they study morality. Some people know precisely how to project innocence, exactly when to produce tears, exactly how to reshape a narrative without committing to a complete lie. And audiences follow confidence before they follow truth. But confidence is not verification. A composed liar remains a liar. A warm-voiced manipulator remains dangerous. A gentle tone can still transmit poison. Never allow yourself to forget that. Because many sincere people exhaust themselves trying to understand why wrongdoing appeared so convincing. Wrongdoing often rehearses. Truth typically arrives looking tired. That is why wounded, honest people can sound emotional, while dishonest people sound collected. One is bearing genuine pain. The other is managing a presentation. The distinction between those two things is enormous. Perhaps that is also why wisdom cautions against placing excessive weight on appearances, because appearances can mesmerize an audience, while the soul underneath quietly deteriorates. You can never truly know what resides inside a person until power is offered, or temptation appears, or jealousy surfaces, or opportunity presents itself with no witnesses. That is where authentic character begins expressing itself. Some people remain kind only while life accommodates them. Some remain loyal only while their emotions derive benefit. Some remain honest only while honesty costs them nothing. But genuine character reveals itself when deceit becomes profitable, when betrayal requires minimal effort, when lying serves an obvious purpose, when no one is watching. That is where souls show themselves. And honestly, many fail that test in significant ways. Still, do not permit that reality to extinguish your hope. Do not become one of those frozen souls certain that every person is concealing something sinister. That particular mindset gradually destroys the capacity to love without conditions. Yes, develop discernment. Yes, recognize patterns when they emerge. Yes, defend your peace, but do not allow betrayal to transform your heart into something sealed off completely. Because darkness travels through imitation. Someone deceives you, and you become emotionally manipulative toward people who never harmed you. Someone wounds you with cruelty, and you begin treating cruelty as something normal and protective. Someone violates your trust, and you stop considering the impact of your actions on others. And the infection moves forward. One damaged soul generating another, that person generating another still. Someone is wounded deeply, and rather than healing with intention, they bleed across every subsequent connection. Do not become that person. The world already has a surplus of wounded egos performing strength. Enough people confusing emotional shutdown with maturity. Enough souls performing heartlessness because genuine vulnerability has become too frightening. Real strength is something entirely different. Real strength is remaining disciplined after being betrayed, remaining honest after experiencing deception, remaining capable of mercy without losing discernment, remaining uncorrupted inside a corrupted environment. That quality is genuinely rare now, and God witnesses those silent battles that receive no recognition from anyone, the effort to remain respectful when anger is justified, the effort to release revenge when revenge feels like the only satisfying option, the effort to preserve integrity while surrounded by those who abandoned theirs. People observe external struggles. God observes the internal ones equally, and internal struggles shape the trajectory of a life far more profoundly than public image ever manages to. So if your heart is fatigued, rest, heal without rushing. Step back from the world if that is what your soul requires. But do not abandon who you are simply because someone else abandoned their own sense of what is right. Because one day, every concealed intention, every hidden cruelty, every silent tear endured, every betrayal committed, every act of quiet patience, all of it will stand fully uncovered before God, and in that moment, truth will no longer require anyone to defend it. Do you know what is quietly remarkable? Some of the people who cause the most damage to others are themselves deeply afraid of being damaged. A person who manipulates lives in fear of being manipulated. A person who deceives carries fear of being deceived. A person who operates entirely from selfishness lives in dread of being abandoned. Because somewhere beneath the performance, people recognize the nature of what they carry. That is why some dishonest people develop paranoia. Always suspicious, always monitoring, always questioning whether people are truly loyal, always afraid that someone will one day treat them the way they have treated others. A guilty mind inhabits a different kind of daily reality, and no volume of projected confidence entirely removes that underlying fear. You can sometimes hear it underneath the laughter, underneath the arrogance, underneath the endless requirement for affirmation. Some souls are loudest precisely because stillness frightens them, because stillness demands honest confrontation with oneself. And honest self-confrontation is brutal when your conscience is carrying hidden faces, hidden tears, hidden wounds you caused and chose to walk past without acknowledgement. That is why people who live with emotional integrity sleep differently, not without pain, not without difficulty, but differently. They do not require 10 fabrications to protect a single story. They do not maintain separate personalities for different audiences. They do not feel panic rising when truth moves closer. Honesty creates a particular kind of internal stability, even when circumstances are genuinely hard. And perhaps that explains why some people who have endured betrayal still carry an unmistakable quietness about them, because pain entered their life, but corruption never successfully entered their soul. Do not underestimate that. A person who survives betrayal without becoming destructive is something increasingly rare, particularly in a world that teaches people to answer cruelty with amplified cruelty, retaliate, humiliate them in return, manipulate them back, dismantle them the way they dismantled you. And yes, the part of us connected to ego finds those ideas vivid and appealing. Sometimes the ego replays revenge in detail, night after night. But revenge rarely heals the wound it claims to address. Most often it simply relocates the pain into new territory. That is why people who finally get what they called revenge so often describe still feeling hollow, because the pain was never addressed, only redirected somewhere else. What healing actually requires is something far more demanding than revenge. Discipline. The emotional discipline to absorb suffering without becoming a source of it for others. The spiritual discipline to endure injustice without letting injustice rewrite your soul. Most people struggle significantly with that. They allow bitterness to quietly reauthor their entire personality. The previously gentle person becomes someone emotionally unavailable. The previously trusting person becomes someone who scrutinizes every interaction. The previously loving person becomes someone who keeps everyone at a distance. The previously patient person becomes someone who erupts without warning. Pain transforms people. That is genuinely true. But transformation can move in two directions, toward understanding or toward darkness. The direction you choose matters permanently, because eventually the suffering period concludes. But the person you became during it may remain indefinitely. Some people survive heartbreak in a physical sense, while their soul never fully unlocks itself again afterward. Not because love ceased to exist in the world, but because fear established itself quietly in the place where openness used to live. Fear of being betrayed again, fear of being humiliated again, fear of exposing their interior world again, fear of extending loyalty toward the wrong person again. And perhaps you recognize that experience. Perhaps someone broke your trust so thoroughly that even moments of peace now carry an undertone of suspicion. Perhaps genuine kindness now triggers a search for hidden motivation. Perhaps your mind involuntarily hunts for concealed agendas behind every smile extended toward you. That is what happens when significant pain arrives without sufficient healing following it. The nervous system remains in a state of readiness for threat, even when the threat has long since passed. But hear this: not every person who enters your life is arriving to cause harm, and not every conclusion was something inflicted on you. Some conclusions were acts of protection that your emotions interpreted as punishment. God removes certain people from our lives for reasons that pride and grief cannot always comprehend right away. Sometimes a betrayal is exposed early, precisely to prevent far deeper damage later. Sometimes a mask falls while your emotional investment is still something you can recover from. Consider what it would mean to discover certain truths after years of complete dependence, after building an entire shared life around someone whose foundation was dishonest. Mercy does not always have a gentle face. Sometimes mercy arrives through heartbreak, through disappointment, through painful separation, through clarity that cuts. And human beings grieve while heaven is quietly protecting them. This is a strange and often misunderstood aspect of existence, and sometimes the answer to the question of why certain people treated you the way they did changes your understanding of everything. Because you gradually recognize that some individuals were not draining your peace accidentally. They were sustained by your emotional exhaustion. Some people experience a particular sense of power when they witness confusion in someone they claim to care for. They feel significant when you are reaching for explanations they have no intention of providing. They feel indispensable when your sense of emotional stability has become dependent on their moods and choices. That is precisely why they alternate, offering warmth, then creating distance, giving presence, then disappearing, providing closeness, then returning to coldness. Sustained confusion creates attachment in people who carry existing wounds. And those who manipulate understand this dynamic with precision. They observe reactions carefully, not emotional experiences, reactions. They observe what makes you remain despite everything. What leads you to apologize when you carry no responsibility for what went wrong? What causes you to doubt your own perception? what enables you to accept treatment you should never have normalized. Once they have mapped your emotional responses, they begin using them. That is why spiritual clarity becomes so essential. Because not every smile reflects genuine goodwill. Not every expression of regret contains actual remorse. Not every intense connection represents health. Intensity can emerge from unhealed experiences as well. From anxiety, from patterns established in earlier pain, from attachment wounds that disguise themselves as love at first glance. People confuse overwhelming emotional pull with genuine connection regularly. Real peace has a recognizable quality. Real love does not persistently destabilize your interior world. Genuine care does not repeatedly embarrass your soul. Actual loyalty does not find entertainment in your confusion. People make mistakes. No one moves through life without causing unintended harm. But repeated patterned emotional destruction is no longer something that qualifies as a mistake. It reveals character. That truth is difficult to absorb for many people, because accepting it means acknowledging that someone understood the harm they were causing and chose not to stop. That can feel like mourning, not mourning the loss of a person, mourning the dissolution of everything you believed that person to be. And constructed beliefs about people are not easy to let go of, particularly when your heart invested itself deeply in maintaining them. But once the constructed belief finally dissolves, clarity becomes possible. You stop making something beautiful out of what was diminishing you. You stop accepting fragments of consideration from people who had access to your whole self. You stop directing blame inward for someone else's moral failures, and gradually, your soul begins returning to itself, quietly, the way someone returns home after surviving an extended period of difficulty in unfamiliar territory. That is when genuine healing begins moving, not when they eventually apologize, not when regret over losing you finally reaches them, not when what they gave comes back to them from the world. Healing begins when your inner peace is no longer contingent on their behavior or their choices. That is genuine freedom, profound and quietly beautiful freedom. Because your emotional state now belongs to God and to yourself again. It is no longer subject to the moods of people who were using it as entertainment. And honestly, some of those people never expected you to reach this place. They anticipated permanent access to the way your emotions respond. Permanent influence, permanent presence in your internal world. But healing severs those invisible connections, and once a soul genuinely awakens, manipulation no longer registers as power. It begins appearing for precisely what it always was. Yours in divine witness, Joker.